There it is. Usually it's not the leaf you're looking at. It's the one underneath, low down, shaded, the only one you'd see if you were on your knees doing something else entirely. A smudge of white on the upper surface like someone had brushed past with dusty hands. Once you've seen the first one, you'll see it everywhere. That's rather how this works. This is powdery mildew, and every year right about now, it arrives on my zucchini and on my winter squash. It has arrived every year I've grown these plants, and it'll arrive next year. I want to talk about what it actually is and what it actually costs you, which is less than most people think and more than I used to think. Let's talk about what to do about it, which for me is very nearly nothing. I also want to be fair to the people who do more because there are real remedies here and some of them work. I just don't use them and I'll explain why. Powdery mildew isn't just one thing. On squash, it's usually one of two fungi. For our purposes, that distinction doesn't really matter. They behave the same way and they arrive at the same time. What's worth understanding is that this one breaks the rule you've learned about every other fungal disease in the garden. Most fungal problems want water sitting on the leaf. Blight, downy mildew, all the things that arrive with your September rains need a wet surface to get going. That's why we're always told to water at the base and never overhead. Powdery mildew doesn't need that. It wants humid air and a dry leaf, warm days, cool nights, a still-crowded canopy that holds moisture in the air without ever quite wetting the surface. Free water on the leaf can actually work against it. Which is to say, Portland August is practically designed for this organism. Warm afternoons, cool damp mornings, a squash plant that has spent 3 months building the dense, most airless canopy possible. The spores blow in. They're not sitting in your soil waiting. They come in from the wind, from everywhere else, and there is no version of this garden where they don't arrive. I find that oddly freeing. It isn't a failure of hygiene, and it isn't something you just did. Here's the part I think often gets misrepresented. A leaf covered in powdery mildew is a leaf that has stopped working properly. The fungus is sitting on the surface, drying the cells underneath and shading the leaf from its own light. Photosynthesis drops. Over enough leaves, over enough weeks, the plant has less energy to put into fruit. That's the mechanism, and it's real. But the timeline matters enormously, and this is where I part company with all the panic. On my zucchini, mildew's due to show up any time now, early to mid-August, and the plant carries on. It keeps setting fruit, it keeps ripening fruit, and I keep picking it. The mildew spreads slowly through the canopy, leaf by leaf, and I genuinely don't notice a change in production until we're well into September. By late September, the plant is winding down anyway. The nights are cold, the light is short, and I'm not expecting zucchini in October. So what I'm watching is not disease killing my plant. What I'm really watching is a plant reaching the end of the season, with a fungus that happens to be keeping pace alongside it. I've come to treat powdery mildew on summer squash as the visible form of the calendar. It's the growing season showing its age. Now I want to be careful here because I could very easily make this sound tidier than it really is. Summer squash and winter squash are not in the same position. With zucchini, you're harvesting immature fruit constantly. Every fruit you pick is already banked. If the plant declines in September, you've lost nothing you were counting on. Winter squash is a bit different. Those fruits are still finishing in September. They're still pulling in sugar, still hardening their rind, still building the skin that determines whether that squash sits happy in your garage until February or if it's going to be soft by Christmas. That finishing work is done by the leaves. So if powdery mildew takes down a winter squash canopy early, say it's stripped the plant by the end of August, that's a genuine cost. Not to the number of fruits necessarily, but their quality. Low sugar, soft rind, softer storage. I'd be misleading you if I said the timing never mattered. On winter squash, it can matter. That's the one place in my garden where slowing this thing down actually earns its keep, which brings me to the small amount that I do about powdery mildew. I take the leaves off. That's pretty much it. That's my intervention. When a leaf is more white than green, and it's clearly past being an asset, I cut it at the base of the stem and take it out. For two reasons. It removes some of the spores and it slows the spread a little. It also opens up the canopy, which moves the air, which is one of the growing conditions I have influence over. But I want to be honest about the size of that effect. It's definitely not a cure. It's not even close to a cure. Every leaf I remove is one leaf among thousands of spore sources, most of which are in gardens I've never been to. What I'm doing is buying days, not weeks, but days are the whole game on winter squash. If I can hold the canopy together into middle of September, those fruits will finish properly. That's worth 20 minutes of clipping. A couple of rules that I hold myself to, and that I've learned kind of the hard way. I'm only going to clip the leaves that are genuinely finished. A leaf with a few spots on it is still worth keeping. It's still adding to the canopy. I don't take too much of the plant at once. Squash fruits sit under these leaves for a reason. If I take the whole canopy out in August and we have a heat wave, I'll be trading the powdery mildew for Sunscald. Sunscald, if you haven't seen it, is a bleach blistered patch on your pumpkins or your squash, and it can be rather worse than what I'm trying to fix. I've had it happen. And I did it in a year that I was feeling particularly organized. The plants looked immaculate, but the squash got sunburned. The cure being worse than the disease is not a metaphor. In this instance, it's a squash. Occasionally, a plant gets taken over far too early. Not just August declining, genuinely finished in the middle of the season, still weeks of growing time ahead, no canopy left to use them. In that case, I would pull the whole plant out and throw it in the garbage. I don't compost on this site at this garden, but if I did, I would not put this in the compost. I would just put it in the green waste bin, and I'll be straight with you about why. Because the usual reason is a bit shaky. You'll hear about composting mildewed material and how it can reinfect your garden next year. In practice, I think that's the weakest part of the case. These spores mostly blow in from other gardens, and they're going to come in no matter what you do. They don't really overwinter in your compost heap the way people might imagine. A hot heap would handle most of it. The better reason not to put in your compost pile right now, particularly if they're close to your garden, is that it could affect this year's garden. If you have it in your compost near this year's garden, it's going to be shedding spores all over everything that's still growing, and that's going to be a good reason to get it off-site. Now there's another good reason for me to pull out a plant that is being taken over by powdery mildew as soon as possible, and it's not scientific. It's about the fact that, as you've seen in this garden, I like to cram as much in here as I can, and empty space in August wouldn't be a loss. It would be a bed that I could plant some of the brassicas or greens or some of the Chinese cabbages or other things that I've been planting that I don't exactly know where I'm going to put them yet. So pulling out a plant that has been overtaken by powdery mildew, I don't think of it as giving up. It's just the next job. Well, I've told you that I don't do much to treat this, but there are real approaches out there for treating it, some with genuine evidence behind them. It would be poor form for me to just dismiss them because I don't personally do it. Briefly, first, you might consider resistant varieties. If you're going to do one thing, I would do that. Look for PM or PMR on the seed packet, powdery mildew resistant. It doesn't mean the plant will be immune, but it can push the onset back by weeks, and it costs you nothing but a different seed choice in February. This is the only one I actively recommend, and it's something I still might do myself. Spacing and sitting. Full sun, generous spacing, air moving through, it genuinely would help. It is also a slightly cruel piece of advice for anyone growing like me on a driveway in containers, which is to say most of you watching this who are in small gardens, we just have to do what we can and accept the rest. Potassium bicarbonate sold as millstop or green cure. This has some of the best evidence behind it, and unusually it can actually knock back mildew that is already present rather than just preventing it. If I were going to spray anything, I might spray that. Milk. Believe it or not, milk diluted somewhere around 1 part milk to 9 parts water sprayed in the sunlight. There is some research here. It's not just folklore, but the results are inconsistent, and it needs reapplying constantly. But harmless to try. Baking soda. This is a classic kitchen remedy, usually with a little oil or soap. It's weaker than the potassium bicarbonate version, and if you use it repeatedly, you're going to be building up sodium in your soil. So that's not something I would do. Neem and horticultural oils. These have some effect, but you don't apply them in real heat or when the plant's already stressed. You could end up scorching the plant. In August, in my container garden, that would be a pretty narrow window. Sulfur. This is genuinely effective, but it's phototoxic to squash above 30 degrees, and it must not go anywhere near an oil. Biological sprays, Bacillus subtilis. It's a preventative rather than a curative. It's modest and real, but what I've heard is it's pretty unspectacular in its results. You all may have other ways that you deal with powdery mildew in your gardens. Please share it in the comments. We'd love to inform people about the various practices as much as we can. The thread running through nearly all of these, they're protectants. They work best applied before the mildew arrives or right at the first sign. Then you want to repeat them every 7 to 14 days for the rest of the season. That's the part that decides it for me, not the cost or the chemistry. It's that I'd be committing to spraying a plant every 10 days from mid-July onward in order to postpone something that on my zucchini, I've decided doesn't really matter. If you're growing winter squash for storage and you want those extra weeks, I can totally understand. I would say reach for the potassium bicarbonate and start early. That's a coherent position, and I wouldn't argue with it. I've simply decided that clipping off leaves strategically gets me most of the way there on the one crop where it matters. I think a lot of gardening advice is written as though every problem is an emergency and every plant has to be saved. But a squash plant is an annual. It has one summer, it's always going to end. The only question was what it would look like on the way out. Powdery mildew is what mine looks like. White on the lower leaves in August, working upward through September until one morning in October the whole thing has collapsed into itself and I pull it out and I plant garlic where it stood, or something like that. I've just noticed over enough seasons that the plant and I had the same schedule in mind all along. Well, thanks for gardening with me today, and I will see you next time.